On a crisp autumn morning, the air carried a refreshing chill as Officer Daniels and his loyal K-9 partner, Max, began their routine patrol through the heart of downtown. The streets buzzed with life. Business people clutching steaming cups of coffee rushed to work, while others lingered at cozy outdoor cafes. Everything seemed normal, the kind of day that blends seamlessly into countless others. But for Officer Daniels, something felt subtly different today. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but experience had taught him to trust those tiny whispers of intuition. Max trotted beside him, his glossy coat gleaming under the soft sunlight. Trained to detect danger, the German Shepherd was more than just a dog. He was a highly skilled member of the police force. Over the years, Max had proven himself time and again, sniffing out drugs, tracking suspects, and even finding missing children. To Daniels, Max wasn't just a partner, he was family. And like any good team, they communicated without words, relying on instinct and mutual understanding. As they turned onto a quieter street near the train station, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The hum of conversation faded, replaced by an almost eerie calm. That's when Daniels noticed him. A man sitting alone on a weathered wooden bench. His hoodie was pulled low over his face, partially shielding him from view. A pair of headphones rested around his neck, though no music played. Beside him sat a battered backpack, its fabric frayed and patched in places. Something about the scene struck Daniels as unusual, but before he could pinpoint why, Max suddenly froze. The dog's body stiffened, every muscle taut. His ears perked up, and his nose twitched rapidly as he locked his gaze onto the man's backpack. Then came the barking, sharp, insistent, and impossible to ignore. Pedestrians nearby paused mid-step, glancing curiously at the commotion. Daniels frowned, trying to redirect Max with a firm command, but the dog wouldn't budge. Instead, he planted himself firmly in front of the bench, barking louder with each passing second. Daniels approached cautiously, offering a polite smile to the man on the bench. "Morning," he greeted warmly, flashing his badge. "I'm Officer Daniels. This is my partner, Max." He gestured to the agitated dog. "Is there anything I should know about your bag?" The man blinked, clearly startled. He fumbled for words, his voice barely above a mumble. No, nothing. Just some personal stuff." He tugged at the straps of the backpack protectively, avoiding eye contact. But Max wasn't convinced. He circled the bench, his nose inches from the bag, sniffing furiously. Every time Daniels tried to pull him away, the dog resisted, growling softly now. It was unlike anything Daniels had seen before. Max was smart, disciplined, and rarely made mistakes. If he was this fixated, there had to be a reason. Curiosity turned to concern as Daniels studied the man more closely. His clothes were mismatched, his hands trembling slightly. Was he hiding something? Or was this all just a misunderstanding? Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain. Max wasn't going to let this go anytime soon. The man on the bench, who introduced himself as Greg, seemed uneasy but tried to appear calm. His eyes darted around nervously, avoiding both Officer Daniels and the persistent gaze of Max. The dog's behavior had drawn a small crowd by now. Curious onlookers whispered among themselves, speculating about what might be happening. Some snapped photos with their phones, while others simply watched, intrigued by the unusual standoff. Daniels kept his tone friendly but firm. "Greg," he said, kneeling slightly to meet the man's eye level, "my dog here seems pretty interested in your backpack. Mind telling me what's inside?" He pointed to Max, who was still circling the bag, his tail stiff and his movements deliberate. The K-9's focus never wavered, even when Daniels gave him a gentle tug on the leash. Greg hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the zipper of the backpack. "It's just my stuff," he stammered. "Clothes, some tools, nothing special." But his voice lacked conviction, and his body language betrayed him. He leaned back slightly, putting more distance between himself and the officer, as if trying to shield the bag from view. Daniels nodded slowly, his instincts kicking into high gear. Something didn't add up. Max wasn't trained to bark at harmless items like clothes or tools. He reacted to danger, threats, or contraband. Whatever was in that backpack, it wasn't ordinary. "Listen, Greg," Daniels continued, his voice steady. "I'm not accusing you of anything. But if you've got nothing to hide, why don't we take a quick look inside? Just to clear things up." Greg swallowed hard, visibly conflicted. For a moment, it looked like he might refuse, but then he sighed and muttered, "Fine, go ahead." He unzipped the main compartment of the backpack reluctantly, pulling out a few random items: a flashlight, a roll of duct tape, and a pair of gloves. Daniels examined each item carefully, but none of them explained Max's intense reaction. If anything, the dog grew even more agitated, pacing back and forth, and letting out low growls that sent shivers down Daniel's spine. The crowd murmured, sensing the tension in the air. A woman holding a toddler stepped back cautiously, while an older man shook his head and muttered something about false alarms. But Daniels knew better. Max didn't make mistakes. There was something deeper going on here, something Greg wasn't saying. "Anything else in there?" Daniels asked, gesturing toward the half-open backpack. Greg hesitated again, glancing around as if searching for an escape route. Finally, he reached into the bag and pulled out a small locked metal case. It was old and weathered, its surface scratched and rusted. The sight of it made Max lunge forward, barking louder than ever before. Daniels quickly tightened his grip on the leash, keeping the dog under control. "This yours too?" Daniels asked, pointing to the case. Greg shook his head vigorously. No, that's not mine. Someone gave it to me to hold on to. I swear, I don't know what's inside." His words tumbled out in a rush, his face pale with anxiety. Daniels exchanged a glance with another officer who had arrived as backup. They both knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding anymore. Max's behavior suggested something far more serious. Daniels turned back to Greg, his expression calm but resolute. "We need to check that case, Greg. You understand, right? It's protocol." Greg nodded weakly, though beads of sweat formed on his forehead. As Daniels prepared to call in the bomb squad, Max sat beside him, his sharp eyes fixed unwaveringly on the mysterious metal box. The dog's instincts had led them this far, and everyone present could feel it. Whatever was inside that case, it wasn't going to be good news. The tension in the air was palpable as Officer Daniels radioed for backup, his voice calm but urgent. Greg sat frozen on the bench, clutching the locked metal case like it might burn him if he let go. His earlier defiance had melted away, replaced by a nervous energy that made him fidget constantly. Every few seconds, he glanced at Max, whose growls grew deeper and more menacing. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their whispers creating a low hum of speculation. Some people edged closer, eager to see what would happen next, while others hung back, sensing danger. As reinforcements arrived, the scene became even more intense. 2 additional officers stepped out of their patrol cars, their expressions serious as they assessed the situation. One of them carried a tactical kit designed for situations involving suspicious packages. Meanwhile, Daniels kept his focus on Greg, trying to piece together the puzzle. "You said someone gave you this case?" he asked, his tone measured but probing. Greg nodded quickly, his hands trembling. "Yeah. A guy I met last night. He paid me to carry it for him. Said it was important, but didn't tell me what's inside." His voice cracked under the weight of the attention, and he looked down at his feet, avoiding eye contact. "I swear, I didn't know anything about it until now." Daniels exchanged a glance with one of the other officers. It wasn't uncommon for criminals to use unsuspecting individuals as mules, especially when transporting dangerous items. But something about Greg's story felt off. Either he was lying, or he was genuinely clueless. Either way, the locked case demanded immediate attention. Max, meanwhile, refused to calm down. Even as Daniels tried to reassure the dog with gentle pats and quiet words, the K9 remained fixated on the case, his body coiled like a spring ready to strike. His instincts were screaming louder than ever before, and Daniels trusted those instincts implicitly. Whatever was inside that box, Max knew it posed a threat, not just to the officers, but potentially to everyone nearby. "All right, Greg," Daniels said firmly, stepping closer. "We're going to need to secure this area and figure out what's in that case. For your safety, and ours, you're coming with us." Greg's face paled further, but he didn't resist as the officers guided him to a nearby police car. They weren't arresting him yet, but they couldn't take any chances either. With Greg secured, the officers turned their full attention to the mysterious case. A specialist from the bomb squad arrived within minutes, clad in protective gear and carrying tools designed for delicate operations. The crowd watched in silence as the expert carefully examined the rusted lock, looking for signs of tampering or booby traps. Max stayed close, his ears perked and his eyes sharp, as though monitoring every move. The bomb technician worked methodically, using specialized equipment to test for hazardous materials without opening the case prematurely. Daniels kept glancing at Greg, who sat slumped in the back seat of the patrol car, staring blankly at Ed. Was he truly innocent, or was this all part of some elaborate ruse? The thought gnawed at Daniels, but he forced himself to stay focused on the task at hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the technician signaled that it was safe to proceed. Using a small cutting tool, he carefully broke the lock, revealing the contents inside. The moment the lid creaked open, Max let out a sharp bark, startling everyone nearby. Daniels leaned in cautiously, his heart pounding as he peered into the case. What he saw made his blood run cold. Rows of vials filled with a clear liquid gleamed ominously in the sunlight. Each one bore labels written in faded ink, detailing chemical compounds that sent chills down Daniel's spine. These weren't harmless substances. They were volatile components often used in homemade explosives. The discovery confirmed Max's suspicions. They had narrowly avoided a potential catastrophe. As the officers secured the evidence and called for hazmat support, Daniels couldn't help but marvel at the dog's uncanny ability to sense danger. Without Max's persistence, the case might have gone unnoticed, or worse, detonated somewhere far more populated. The crowd murmured in awe, realizing how close they had come to disaster. And as Greg stared wide-eyed at the confiscated materials, one thing became painfully clear. Whoever had given him that backpack had put countless lives at risk, including his own. The revelation of the vials inside the metal case sent a ripple of shock through everyone present. The air seemed to grow heavier, and the once curious crowd began to disperse, their earlier excitement replaced by unease. Officers worked quickly to secure the area, setting up barricades and warning signs to keep people at a safe distance. Hazmat teams arrived shortly after, clad in bright yellow suits that stood out against the muted tones of the autumn morning. Their presence only heightened the gravity of the situation. Greg, still seated in the back of the patrol car, looked like he was on the verge of panic. His face had lost all color, and his hands trembled uncontrollably as he stared at the activity unfolding around him. When one of the officers approached the car to ask more questions, Greg blurted out, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what was in there." His voice cracked with desperation, but the officer remained calm, jotting down notes without judgment. Daniels leaned against the hood of his patrol car, watching the scene unfold while Max sat loyally by his side. The K9's ears were still perked up, his sharp eyes scanning the chaos as if ensuring no detail went unnoticed. Daniels couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and relief for his partner. If it weren't for Max's instincts, they might never have discovered the dangerous cargo hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, forensic experts carefully examined the vials, handling them with gloved hands and placing each one into a sealed container. Labels on the vials identified the liquid as a highly reactive chemical compound, ingredients commonly used in improvised explosive devices, IEDs, The implications were staggering. Whoever had assembled this kit clearly intended to cause harm, and Greg unwittingly became part of their plan. As the investigation progressed, Daniel stepped closer to the hazmat team to get a better look at the evidence. One of the technicians explained the potential danger. If these chemicals were mixed improperly, or worse, intentionally, they could cause significant damage. We're talking about something capable of injuring or even killing dozens of people. Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a random find. It was a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. Back at the patrol car, another officer continued questioning Greg, probing deeper into his story. "Who gave you the backpack?" The officer asked gently, trying to coax more information without overwhelming him. Greg hesitated, his mind racing as though piecing together fragmented memories. I don't know his real name," he admitted finally. "He called himself Rook. He approached me last night outside a bar, said he needed someone to carry the bag for a few hours, and offered me cash. I thought it was weird, but I needed the money." The mention of Rook caught Daniel's attention immediately. It wasn't much to go on, but it was a lead. A name, however vague, that could help unravel the larger mystery behind the dangerous package. The officers exchanged meaningful glances, knowing they now had a crucial piece of the puzzle. While Greg spilled more details, Max suddenly perked up again, his focus shifting toward the backpack lying nearby. Though the metal case had been removed, the dog sniffed intently at the remaining contents. Daniels followed, curious about what else might be hiding inside. Sure enough, tucked beneath a layer of cloth, they found a crumpled map marked with red circles around specific locations in the city. Each circle corresponded to busy areas, train stations, shopping malls, and public parks. Daniel's stomach tightened as he realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't just a random act of smuggling. It was part of a calculated plan. Someone had intended to use these materials to target crowded places, maximizing destruction and fear. And Greg, whether knowingly or not, had been a pawn in their deadly game. As the pieces began to fall into place, Daniels turned to Max, giving the dog an affectionate pat. "You did good, buddy," he said softly, pride evident in his voice. Max wagged his tail briefly before returning to his vigilant stance, ever watchful for any lingering threats. The discovery changed everything. What started as a routine patrol had morphed into a high-stakes operation, one that could prevent untold devastation. But as Daniels glanced at Greg, slumped defeated in the patrol car, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man's involvement was only the tip of the iceberg. There were bigger players at work here, people who wouldn't hesitate to put innocent lives at risk to achieve their sinister goals. With the vials and the marked map now in their possession, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Officers worked tirelessly to piece together the puzzle, knowing that time was of the essence. The red circles on the map pointed to some of the busiest locations in the city, places where hundreds, if not thousands, of people gathered daily. If the chemicals were intended for use there, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Every second counted, and the team sprang into action with precision. Greg, still sitting in the patrol car, became both a suspect and a key witness. His cooperation was crucial, but his nervous demeanor made it clear he was terrified, not just of the law, but of whoever had given him the backpack. "I didn't sign up for this," he muttered repeatedly, his voice trembling. "I thought I was helping someone move stuff. Not this." Daniels could see the fear in Greg's eyes, and while he couldn't dismiss the possibility that Greg was lying, something about his demeanor suggested he truly had no idea what he'd been carrying. To ease the tension, Daniels knelt beside the open door of the patrol car and spoke in a calm, reassuring tone. "Greg, we need your help," he said firmly but kindly. "Whoever gave you this bag, they're dangerous. If you know anything else, anything at all, now's the time to tell us." Greg hesitated, his hands gripping the edge of the seat so tightly his knuckles turned white. Finally, he nodded. "Rook. He mentioned meeting me again tonight. said I'd get more money if I brought the bag back to him. This revelation sent a jolt through the team. It wasn't just evidence they had, it was an opportunity. With Greg's reluctant agreement to cooperate, officers devised a plan to set up a sting operation. They would use Greg as bait to lure Rook into the open, ensuring the area was heavily secured and monitored. Max, ever vigilant, would remain on standby, ready to assist if needed. For Daniels, it was a risky move, but one they couldn't afford to pass up. As preparations got underway, forensic experts continued analyzing the vials and the map. Traces of fingerprints on the metal case led them to partial matches in criminal databases, hinting at connections to a larger network involved in illegal activities. Meanwhile, surveillance footage from nearby cameras revealed glimpses of Rook, a shadowy figure wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses, deliberately avoiding direct exposure. Investigators pored over every frame, determined to uncover any identifying details. The hours leading up to the planned meeting felt endless. Officers briefed Greg repeatedly, coaching him on what to say and how to act when Rook arrived. Despite his fear, Greg seemed resolute, perhaps realizing that his only chance at redemption lay in helping bring down the real culprits. Daniels admired his courage, even as he kept a close eye on him, wary of any sudden moves. That evening, under the cover of darkness, the operation unfolded. Greg stood near a dimly lit alleyway, clutching the empty backpack as instructed. Around him, plainclothes officers blended seamlessly into the surroundings, their radios crackling softly with updates. Max waited in the shadows with Daniels, his sharp eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. The tension was suffocating, every sound amplified in the quiet night. Then, out of the darkness, a figure approached cautiously. It was Rook, or at least someone matching his description. He moved with calculated steps, his head low as he scanned the area suspiciously. When he reached Greg, he spoke in hushed tones, demanding the bag. But before he could react further, officers closed in, surrounding him within seconds. Rook froze, his face masked with shock as handcuffs clicked into place. Back at the station, interrogations began immediately. Rook proved to be a slippery character, evading questions and offering cryptic answers. However, the combination of evidence collected, from the vials and map to Greg's testimony, painted a damning picture. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in Rook's composure, revealing ties to a broader criminal organization specializing in arms trafficking and sabotage. As dawn broke over the city, Daniels allowed himself a moment of reflection. Thanks to Max's instincts and Greg's eventual cooperation, they had prevented a potential disaster. Yet, the case was far from over. There were still unanswered questions, loose ends that needed tying up. But for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized, and that was enough to give everyone a glimmer of hope. The arrest of Rook marked a turning point in the investigation, but it was only the beginning of unraveling a much larger web. As detectives dug deeper into his background, they uncovered links to an underground network operating not just within the city but across state lines. This wasn't some small-time operation. It was a sophisticated organization involved in illegal arms deals, smuggling hazardous materials, and orchestrating acts of chaos for profit. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies, prompting a multi-agency task force to be assembled overnight. Greg's role shifted from reluctant participant to vital informant. Still shaken by the gravity of what he'd been unwittingly dragged into, he agreed to work closely with investigators. In exchange for immunity, he provided detailed descriptions of his interactions with Rook and others connected to the group. His testimony revealed chilling details, coded conversations, drop-off points, and even hints about future targets. While Greg admitted he hadn't understood the full scope of their plans at first, his account painted a terrifying picture of how easily ordinary people could become pawns in dangerous games. Meanwhile, forensic teams worked around the clock analyzing every piece of evidence recovered from the backpack and Rook's belongings. Fingerprints lifted from the metal case matched several individuals with prior criminal records, including explosives experts and known smugglers. Phone records traced back to burner devices used by the group revealed encrypted messages discussing packages and delivery schedules. Investigators painstakingly decrypted these communications, piecing together a timeline that confirmed the network's intent to strike multiple locations simultaneously. Daniels and Max remained at the heart of the operation, their bond stronger than ever after the harrowing events. Max had proven himself once again, his instincts uncanny in sniffing out danger. Officers joked that the K-9 deserved a medal, but Daniels knew the real reward was seeing justice served. He spent long hours poring over reports and coordinating with other departments, determined to ensure no stone was left unturned. One breakthrough came when surveillance footage captured Rook meeting with another man, a figure identified as Victor Kane, a shadowy enforcer with ties to extremist groups. Kane's name appeared in numerous federal databases, flagged for orchestrating attacks designed to instill fear and disrupt public order. With this new lead, authorities launched raids on suspected safe houses linked to the network. Dozens of arrests were made, and caches of weapons, chemicals, and blueprints for explosive devices were seized before they could be deployed. As the days passed, the scale of the conspiracy became clearer and more alarming. The group's ultimate goal wasn't random violence but calculated terror aimed at destabilizing the region. Their targets included major transportation hubs, government buildings, and crowded public spaces. The map found in Greg's backpack was just one component of a broader plan, meticulously crafted to maximize casualties and panic. Despite the mounting pressure, Daniels felt a renewed sense of purpose. Every arrest, every confiscated item brought them closer to dismantling the network completely. Yet there were moments of quiet reflection too. Late one evening, as he sat in the precinct with Max lying loyally at his feet, Daniels thought about how close they'd come to tragedy. If Max hadn't barked at that backpack, if Greg hadn't cooperated, or if Rook hadn't slipped up during the sting, countless lives could have been lost. The media caught wind of the story, dubbing Max a hero and highlighting the critical role animals play in law enforcement. Photos of the German Shepherd circulated widely, accompanied by headlines praising his life-saving actions. Daniels fielded interviews graciously, using the platform to emphasize the importance of teamwork, not just between humans, but also with their four-legged partners. For Greg, the ordeal was life-changing. Though haunted by guilt, he expressed gratitude for being given a second chance. With counseling and support, he vowed to turn his life around, promising to use his experience to warn others about the dangers of trusting strangers. Meanwhile, Rook and his associates faced charges that would likely keep them behind bars for decades. As the dust began to settle, Daniels couldn't help but marvel at how everything had unfolded. What started as a routine patrol had spiraled into a high-stakes mission to prevent disaster. And while the fight against crime was far from over, one thing was certain: Max's unwavering loyalty and sharp instincts had made all the difference. The culmination of the investigation brought a wave of relief and justice that rippled through the city. Rook, Victor Kane, and several other members of the criminal network were formally charged with conspiracy, possession of hazardous materials, and intent to commit acts of terror. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The vials, the map, encrypted messages, surveillance footage, and Greg's testimony all painted an irrefutable picture of their sinister plans. Prosecutors wasted no time filing charges, confident that the case would lead to lengthy prison sentences for everyone involved. Greg, meanwhile, found himself in an unexpected position: redemption. Though his initial involvement had been reckless and naive, his decision to cooperate fully with law enforcement earned him immunity from prosecution. It wasn't just leniency, it was recognition of the vital role he played in stopping a potential catastrophe. During interviews with investigators, Greg opened up about his struggles with unemployment and financial desperation, explaining how those circumstances made him vulnerable to exploitation. "I thought I was doing something harmless," he admitted during one session. "But now I see how wrong I was. I'll never make that mistake again." His honesty resonated with Daniels, who saw glimpses of his own younger self in Greg, a man trying to navigate life's challenges but making poor choices along the way. With guidance from social workers and counselors, Greg began taking steps toward rebuilding his life. He enrolled in job training programs and volunteered at community centers, hoping to use his experience as a cautionary tale for others. While the scars of guilt would take time to heal, Greg's determination to change inspired those around him. As for Max, the K9 became nothing short of a local legend. News outlets couldn't get enough of the heroic dog, whose instincts had saved countless lives. Photos of Max standing proudly beside Daniels appeared everywhere, from newspapers to social media platforms. People marveled at the bond between the officer and his canine partner, praising Max not just as a working dog, but as a symbol of hope and resilience. The precinct even received donations from grateful citizens, earmarked specifically for K9 units and their training programs. Daniels embraced the attention humbly, using every opportunity to highlight the importance of police dogs in modern law enforcement. "Max isn't just my partner. He's family," Daniels said during one press conference. "He's trained to detect danger, protect people, and assist in ways we can't always do alone." This case proves how invaluable animals like him are to keeping our communities safe. His words struck a chord, prompting renewed support for K9 initiatives across the region. But behind the accolades and public praise lay quieter moments of reflection. Daniels often took long walks with Max after their shifts, letting the dog sniff freely and stretch his legs. These peaceful interludes gave Daniels time to process everything they'd been through: the adrenaline-fueled patrols, the tense standoffs, and the near misses. Each step reminded him of how close they'd come to tragedy, and how lucky they were to have prevented it. The city itself seemed lighter, too. Residents expressed gratitude openly, thanking officers for their vigilance and celebrating Max's heroics. At a special ceremony hosted by the mayor, Max was honored with a Medal of Valor, while Daniels received commendations for exemplary service. Families brought their children to meet the famous K9, eager to shake paws with the dog who had protected them without ever asking for recognition. Yet, amidst the celebrations, Daniels remained grounded. Crime didn't stop just because one operation succeeded. There would always be new threats, new challenges to face. But knowing that Max was by his side gave him confidence, not arrogance, but a quiet assurance that together they could handle whatever came next. For Greg, the road ahead was still uncertain, but he faced it with newfound purpose. He attended counseling sessions regularly, learning coping strategies to avoid falling back into old habits. Neighbors who once dismissed him as a drifter now greeted him warmly, impressed by his efforts to turn his life around. Slowly but surely, Greg began to rebuild trust, not just with others, but with himself. And so, the story came full circle. A routine patrol had transformed into a high-stakes mission, exposing a dangerous network and preventing untold devastation. Through teamwork, courage, and a little bit of luck, justice prevailed. As Daniels watched Max nap contentedly in the corner of the precinct, tail twitching in slumber, he smiled. They had done good work. And there was plenty more to come. Months passed since the harrowing events that had turned a quiet autumn morning into one of the most pivotal days in Officer Daniels' career. Life in the city slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact of what Max and his team had accomplished lingered in the hearts of many. The K9's heroics became the stuff of local legend, inspiring stories shared over coffee, at family dinners, and even in classrooms where children learned about the importance of bravery, both human and canine. Max himself seemed unfazed by the fame, content to spend his days doing what he loved, patrolling the streets with Daniels, sniffing out trouble before it could escalate, and occasionally chasing after stray tennis balls during breaks. But for Daniels, every bark, every wag of Max's tail carried deeper meaning now. He often found himself marveling at how much trust they had built, not just between them, but also with the community they served. People approached them on the street more often now, offering smiles or kind words. "That's the dog who saved us," they'd whisper to their kids, pointing respectfully at Max. When Max eventually reached retirement age, the precinct held a special ceremony to honor his years of service. Officers gathered around as Daniels removed Max's badge and collar, presenting him with a shiny new tag that read Hero. Tears welled up in Daniels' eyes as he knelt beside his loyal partner, scratching behind Max's ears one last time in uniform. "You've earned this, buddy," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Though Max would no longer accompany him on patrols, Daniels promised to visit him daily, ensuring the dog spent his golden years surrounded by love and comfort. In the years that followed, Max's legacy lived on. Inspired by his story, the city allocated additional funding for K-9 units, expanding training programs and equipping officers with better resources. New recruits looked up to Daniels and Max as role models, learning valuable lessons about teamwork, instinct, and dedication. Posters featuring Max's image hung in schools and community centers, accompanied by messages encouraging people to respect law enforcement and the animals who worked tirelessly alongside them. Greg, too, continued down a path of transformation. With support from counselors and mentors, he secured steady employment at a local warehouse and volunteered his free time mentoring at-risk youth. His story became a powerful reminder of second chances and the dangers of making poor decisions under pressure. During speaking engagements, he always credited Max and Daniels for saving not only lives, but also his soul. "If it weren't for them," he'd say, "I might still be lost." The criminal network dismantled through the investigation remained a stark warning of the threats lurking beneath society's surface. Authorities worked tirelessly to ensure such groups couldn't reemerge, tightening security measures and fostering collaboration between agencies. The case served as a benchmark for future operations, proving that vigilance, teamwork, and cutting-edge technology could thwart even the most sinister plots. Daniels, now a seasoned veteran of the force, carried the memory of that fateful day with pride. Whenever he trained new K-9 handlers, he shared Max's story, emphasizing the bond between humans and dogs. "They're not just tools or assets," he'd explain. "They're partners, friends, and sometimes heroes." His words resonated deeply, inspiring countless officers to treat their K-9 companions with the same level of care and respect. As for Max, he spent his retirement lounging in Daniels' backyard, basking in sunlight and enjoying leisurely walks through the park. Neighbors adored him, often stopping to pet him or slip him treats. Children giggled as he playfully nudged their hands with his wet nose, unaware of the incredible feats he had once performed. To them, he was simply a friendly old dog, but to those who knew his story, he was so much more. One crisp winter evening, as Daniels sat on his porch, watching Max snooze peacefully at his feet, he reflected on everything they'd been through together. From routine patrols to life-altering discoveries, their journey had been extraordinary. Though Max's working days were behind him, his spirit endured. In the hearts of those he protected, in the strengthened bonds within the community, and in the countless lives touched by his courage. And so, the tale of Max, the K-9 who wouldn't stop barking, came to a close. But his legacy would live forever. Through loyalty, instinct, and unwavering determination, one dog had reminded everyone of the profound difference a single act of bravery could make. As Daniels leaned back in his chair, listening to the distant hum of the city, he smiled. Somewhere, deep inside, he knew Max was still watching over them all.